a little tissue dispenser that opens up. It's even got some period tissues in from the era. No, that doesn't work, does it? Hello friends and welcome. I'm VA Adam. I'm sorry it's been such a long time since my last update, but I've been moving house and I'm now in the beautiful Surrey Hills, and what a gorgeous evening we've got for filming this video tonight. So I've actually got a script today, hence I've got this piece of paper, and I've already gone off script, so that's a great start, isn't it? In today's video, I'm going to be showing you my 1972 Buick Riviera. I did a little walk around video that was really short, and I wanted to go a bit more in depth, hence having the script, because there's so much in here that I want to tell you about this car, and I want to make sure that I don't miss anything out. So to begin with, I purchased her back in July 2019, and I purchased her from an auction that was held, and it was actually held at Brooklands Motor Museum. It was held by Historics. They're absolutely great guys, really professional, ran a fantastic auction, and if you've never been to an auction before and you're in the UK, I definitely recommend that you check out one of their auctions. They're just absolutely brilliant, and one of the great things about them is that you can go there, you can spend £30 on a catalogue for the auction, and you just get to go in for the whole day. You can look around the cars, you can sit in them, you can properly get right up close to them. It's a fantastic day, and it's brilliant and a must for any car enthusiast. So if you are able to make it one of Historic's preview days or their auctions, I definitely recommend you check that out. So when I purchased this Buick, she was in great shape, but I've done a bit of sympathetic restoration to her since owning her. The restoration is more kind of preventative rather than reactive, and owning her has been absolutely incredible. Driving her is a real privilege, and I just feel so fortunate to own such a fantastic car, such a brilliant piece of American history. So come on, let's have a little look around her. I mean, the first thing that you can't help but notice is just the sheer size of this car. It was actually referred to as the gentleman's sports car, although, to be honest, referring to this as a sports car, I mean, it's a bit comical really. It's a bit like referring to the USS Nimitz as a speedboat. She's just over 5.5 metres long, just over 2 metres wide, or 18 feet long and 6'8" in old money. And she's just a brilliant colour as well, really lovely. And it was actually called burnished bronze, this colour, from the factory. And believe it or not, it was the second most popular colour in 1972 when this car was released. The first most popular was emerald mist. It's just such a 70s colour, that kind of dark green colour, just like this. It's just such a 70s colour. Let's talk a little bit about the shape. I mean, this was a really wild car at the time, and it still is even today. There's really nothing that looks like this. And unfortunately, it is a bit of a Marmite car. People either love it or hate it. Thankfully, these days, loving it more than hating it. And that was at the time as well, which really reflected in some low sales figures for GM, unfortunately. And the shape back here was referred to as the boat tail. It just has this lovely kind of boat look to it, you know. It really suits the name. And this car was really aimed at those kind of high-flying bachelors at the time. In fact, the logo was an extraordinary car for people that don't want a car like everyone else's. And I think that's brilliant. It just sums this car up so well as to how unusual it was. As I said earlier, it was dubbed the gentleman's sports car. And what that really meant to GM was that this was a big kind of luxury yacht of a car that was really comfortable to drive, but it just had a bit of power and, really importantly for the time, some good performance and handling as well. And the handling is really good on this, especially for an American car of the time, and such a huge car as well. There are a few features that made this Riviera handle really well. There was the variable ratio power steering, there was the AccuDrive system, a double wishbone front suspension, and front disc brakes all contributed to making this car a bit sporty and a great handling car. The AccuDrive was a change in the suspension geometry, and what GM did was they changed the suspension geometry so that it was a little bit more stable if there were kind of gusty winds. If there was like a side wind, it wouldn't sort of push the car around the road or try and push it off of the road. It would just be a bit more planted and a bit more stable. The variable power steering as well was quite interesting, because what that meant was there was a variable ratio where it was less sensitive when the wheel was at the sort of dead centre, and then as you turned the wheel more towards full lock, the wheels reacted more as you got towards full lock. So a huge chunk of this enormous car is taken up with this enormous hood, which holds underneath it an equally enormous engine. This is a 455 cubic inch V8, or 7.5 litres of all American iron, with a 4-barrel Rochester carburettor on top. This engine produces 225 horsepower and 375 foot-pounds of torque. And for those of you who aren't familiar with American engines, you might be thinking to yourself, 225 horsepower from a 7.5 litre V8? That doesn't seem that high. And to be honest, you'd be absolutely right. To give you an idea, a Porsche 911S from the same time period was producing 190 horsepower, and it was doing that from 2 less cylinders on a 2.3 litre engine. So yeah, absolutely, this was producing relatively quite a lot of less power. If you're interested in knowing why American engines, particularly from this period, were producing comparatively such low horsepower, I will be doing another video about that on the near future, so be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss that video if you're interested. Let's have a look inside the engine, and I wanted to first of all point out something I just found absolutely astonishing when I first saw this engine. All of this over here, and all of this pipe work and everything that's here, this is all just the heater assembly and air conditioning unit. I just think it's incredible. All of this is bigger than what most engines are on modern cars. It's quite incredible. It's also relatively common on American engines to put stickers on the air cleaner like you've got here. In this case, the 4554 stands for 455 cubic inch engine and a 4-barrel Rochester carburettor. But it's not always the case. On some cars they would be quite obscure with what they meant. For example, the Oldsmobile 442. The 442 actually stood for 4-barrel carburettor, 4-speed transmission and 2 exhausts. So, you know, they kind of had some unusual allocations for the numbers that they'd put on the top here. This huge engine is married to a GM TH400 3-speed automatic gearbox, which is a fantastic gearbox, just really smooth, really bulletproof. And the gearbox was so fantastic that it was used on Rolls-Royces, Jaguars, Ferraris from the same era as well. They all borrowed that from GM. One of the other things that you'll notice in here, again, if you're especially not familiar with American engines, is just the huge amount of space that you've got in here. You've got so much space around every component to work. It just makes this engine a real delight to work on, because you can just get tools and sort of everything in here so easily. The only thing is, when you're trying to work right at the back here, it can be a bit of a stretch, but to be honest, I just climb into the engine bay. I find it a little bit easier to work in there. Let's go down to the grille just here. This was referred to as the egg crate grille because it looks like an egg crate in America. And the 1971 Riviera actually had some sort of straight bars that went across here rather than this egg crate grille. So that's one of the ways that you can identify a 72 from a 71 on these Rivieras. You'll also see here as well, there's these rubber mouldings around the bumper. These look relatively straightforward, but these are virtually impossible to get hold of. The rubber moulding actually has a metal kind of backing to it to give it its shape, and what happened was, in the wet states in America, the metal used to rust, and in the dry states the rubber would perish, so they're virtually impossible to get hold of. Luckily these ones are in very good shape. And that's a bit of a theme on this car. The Rivieras from this era, there were so few made comparatively that if you want anything that's specific to a 71 to 73 Riviera, it can be quite difficult to get hold of those. But Thankfully, there's not too much that's specific to this car. It's mainly kind of interior parts and some of these unusual parts. Certainly everything in the engine is really, really universal. So just moving up here, one of the things I love is just this little front fender shape here. If you have a look at this front fender, if you're at all, again, familiar with American cars, this is just 100% Cadillac, this shape that's around here. And just to explain to anybody who isn't familiar with American cars, in America, especially back in the day, there were the big three, what were referred to as the big three. That was Ford, GM, and Chrysler. Those were the big three manufacturers in America. And each of those manufacturers had sub-brands underneath them. So Buick, for example, is a sub-brand of General Motors or GM. And Cadillac was also a sub-brand of GM as well. So it's very, very common for these parts to be interchanged or lent between different cars. And that's why you kind of, if you look at American cars from this sort of era, you can see how certain parts are familiar and they kind of look like they've been interchanged. And this, I just love this little fender here with the with this Cadillac look. I just think it looks absolutely fantastic. To lend even more weight to this, one of the designers on this car was a guy called Bill Mitchell, and he was a designer within GM, and he designed a lot of Cadillacs from the 50s as well. So you can really see some of his inspiration in here. There's some Corvette inspiration at the back as well, but we'll talk about that as we get there. Down here you can see some marker lights, and these were put on as federally mandated safety requirements by the Americans, and I really like these. I mean, at night, especially by a junction, this really helps the front of the car just stand out. Continuing along the back here, you've just got this really cool sweeping line along here that then just kicks up and follows the line of this window just on the side here. And I just think that this sort of shape, it gives it a real sense of motion, even when it's not in motion. It just looks great, and it kind of gives it that sort of pitch with the sweep here to really accentuate the lines. As I said, the sweep here is echoed above with the windows, and you notice that there's no B-pillar as well. So when the windows are all down, like they are in this position, you just get this beautiful open space here. It's just such a lovely look of the car. And when you're inside, you just feel outside, you know, you almost feel like you're in a convertible. Let's have a little look at the wheels here as well. So these wheels are all stock, but they were optional extras at the time. The outside of the wheel here is chromed, and then the inside here is metal with paint over them. I've done some light refurbishment work on them. You see they're not in absolutely perfect condition, but they are in very good condition. And you've got these brilliant center caps on here with the Riviera R on as well. You've got these kind of sports wheels here, but you've got this thin white wall on the tyre, and I think this personifies the car. What I was saying earlier about it being a gentleman's sports car, you've got these like cool little sports rally wheels, but then you've got the slightly more refined white walls on the outside for just that little taste of luxury. So coming around the back here, I mean, this is where the party is, right? This is where all of the cool shape is and the controversy of the car. And if you're at all familiar with American cars of this era, you might be looking at this and thinking it maybe looks a little bit familiar. And you'd be absolutely right. The back of this is so similar to a Corvette of the era. And Bill Mitchell, who I mentioned earlier, who's one of the designers, he actually worked on the 1963 split window Corvette. And if you look at the back of this, it's so similar to a split window Corvette, even with the stress divide in the glass, in the rear glass here, is sort of that homage to the split window. The 63 Corvette split window was a 1 year only Corvette. They got rid of the split window, and Bill Mitchell within GM, he apparently was quite upset about the removal. So it's really nice as this little homage to the split window just there. So I talked earlier about identifying the 71 to the 72 by the grille on the front. Another way is to look at the deck lid on the trunk here, because this one is from a 72, but 71 had these kind of louvers that were on this section. It didn't last very long. It was only there for 1 year because apparently it kind of brought a few fumes into the cabin, so a bit less than ideal while you're trying to drive. So they kind of got rid of that and they went to this normal looking deck lid here. The Trunk is opened by this key just here, which is in the R of this Riviera badge, which is really, really cool. So we'll just pop that in. Like a lot of American cars from this era, the key actually, there's a key for the ignition and a separate key for the trunk as well. As you can imagine, like everything on this car really, the trunk is absolutely huge. It's quite surprisingly impractical for its size. There's a huge amount of space taken up here with the spare wheel, as you can see, but that wasn't really that unusual for American cars at this time period, to be honest. Coming down here is where the fuel filler is, and it's actually hidden behind the spring-loaded license plate, which is just so cool. You kind of pull this down and you've got a little fuel filler there. Just such a cool feature. Probably the only thing cooler than this on the American cars was in the early 50s Cadillacs and on the 1956 and 57 Continental Mark II. They actually hid it behind the tail light, and the tail light was spring-loaded. It's just such a cool feature. So let's go around to the door and take a look inside. These door handles are so cool. They're like the door handles you get on one of those old fridges, you know? And this Riviera is actually really rare because it has manual windows. There are very, very few that had manual windows. Almost all of them had power windows, but this one's got manual. And then we've got this fantastic bench seat inside, and I just absolutely love a bench seat on a car. I just think it's such a cool feature, such a bygone feature that you just don't see in cars anymore. Just really, really great. And this particular bench seat is actually 6-way power adjusted as well. So it's a bit strange. It's got a power adjusted bench seat, but no power windows. But you know, that was how this car was spec'd. There's also this super cool shape to the dashboard as well. And this shape was designed to kind of reflect the shape on the back with this sort of sweeping shape to the point here as well. So one of the things on this car that's actually quite small, or at least very, very thin, is this very, very delicate steering wheel here. It's this lovely little pencil thin, delicate steering wheel on such a huge car. It's just wonderful. I absolutely love this steering wheel. The other thing is as well, this car's power steering is so over boosted that you can literally just steer this with your pinky even when you're stationary. It's just wonderful. Hence you only needing this very, very thin little delicate steering wheel. So going across the dash here, from the left-hand side, we've got the headlights here. You just pull those out once and twice to turn them on, push them back in to turn them off. Up here is the wash button for the windscreen washer, and then you've got the toggle switch here for the windscreen wipers, and they go at 2 speed. Oh, pretty fancy. Down here you've got the heating controls. I've read the manual on how to use these heating controls about 5 times, and I'm still none the wiser as to how they work, but you know, these kind of slide along and do some various things there. Then moving across to the middle here, we've got the speedo, of course, which is just a lovely sweeping speedo across there. We've got the fuel gauge down in the bottom there. We've got some warning lights over on the right hand side, and we've got the gear selector just in the middle there, which is changed by this huge selector up here by the steering wheel. Just pull it towards you and pull it down to change into the gears. You've got reverse, neutral, drive. It's all pretty self-explanatory. Then you've got L2 and L1, and L actually stood for low, and all it is it's basically just saying second gear and first gear, because you remember earlier it's the 3-speed automatic. On the stalk here you've got the indicators, which are pretty regular in how they operate, and then just back here you've got the tilt control. So you pull this towards you and it releases the tilt control, and you can just tilt the steering wheel into different positions. And the cruise control here, again, you might be thinking to yourself, oh my god, it's got cruise control back in 1972. Yeah, absolutely. American cars had cruise control very, very early, and cruise control is a little bit weird to activate. You've kind of got to push the button in and slowly release it. But the cool thing about its cruise control is it is, like a lot of things on this car, it's all mechanical. So the cruise control works on like a vacuum operated system, but the trouble is it can make it a little bit of a sort of motion of accelerating, decelerating, accelerating, decelerating. So if you suffer from seasickness or anything like that, then I wouldn't go near that. Over on the right here you've got the clock, and the clock is working. I've actually converted this clock to a quartz movement so that it's a bit more reliable and works a bit better. Down here you've got the cruise control indicator, which just lights up green when the cruise control's engaged. And then over on the right here you've got your FM and AM stereo. How cool is that? I love the way that the frequencies just flip up like that when you change from AM to FM. So cool. Going over to the passenger side now, you've got a couple of vents here, and then you've got the glove box, and the glove box is a really nice size in there. So you've got plenty of storage for all different bits and pieces that you need to carry. There's a couple of little optional extras which I've put into the car. Now these wouldn't have come with the car, but they were available at the time as optional dealer fitted extras. One of them is a little litter bin just here that folds out. I just think that's so cool. And the other is a little tissue box just there, and it's even got some original tissues in from the 70s, so that's pretty cool. There's only a couple of aftermarket items in this car. One is this big console from Classic Consoles. This is just brilliant because it gives you a couple of drinks holders. It gives you a little bit of storage as well, because there's not really much storage on this car outside of the glove box. And one of the brilliant things about this is it's not secured in at all. It's not held in permanently at all. So you can just take this out and then the car's straight back to a stock look. The only other aftermarket item in here which did come with the car are just these gauges down here, and I just left them in because they're useful to have the extra kind of readouts from the car. The only thing I've done is on the oil pressure, I changed the hose to a stainless steel hose rather than the nylon one that it came with. I got that from a company called Think Automotive here in the UK. And if you guys are after a company for doing hoses or couplings or anything like that, honestly, they are the guys to go for. They haven't paid me to say that. I'm just saying they're the guys to go to. They're absolutely fantastic. This hose, for example, they made it up whilst I waited. They put little angle connectors on. They even worked out the hose route and put the connectors in the way so it didn't kink or anything like that. Just brilliant guys, really know what they're doing there. So the back has some really comfortable seats as well. Access to the back is pretty easy. You just pull this little toggle, push this little toggle back, and the seats just fold forward like this. You've got lovely seating in the back there. And I just think the imagery of this is just wonderful, with this nice yellowy sort of ancient glowing light there, and the back here, you can imagine it just being so comfortable, and it's just so inviting. It's just wanting you to sit in the back here. The only thing with getting in the back of these cars, if you do ever get in the back of one of these, is just watch this section here, because this is absolutely solid and it's quite easy to catch your shins on this. So just be careful if you're ever getting in the back of one of these that you don't catch your shins on there. And then finally at the back here, you've just got the real parcel shelf. We've got a couple of 6x9 speakers under there which were put in afterwards. It just gives the stereo a little bit of a nicer sound, but to be honest, if you're cruising along in this, you're probably going to be listening to that lovely V8 rumble. And speaking of that V8 rumble, why don't we start her up and have a little listen. Feel of this car is just brilliant. You've got this lovely big relaxed engine that's just so torquey and just smooth and rumbles along. You got this ridiculously overboosted steering that's just requires no effort at all. And you'd think with a car this big, it might be a little bit difficult to kind of maneuver it around, or you might be conscious of its size, but to be honest, you're not at all. The car gives you so much confidence in the steering and in the engine and everything like that. It's like it's saying, hey, you've had a really hard day, just relax, I'll take it from here. The other lovely thing about these old cars as well is the visibility that you've got all around, because you've got these super thin A pillars and you've got no B pillar, and the C pillars even are relatively small. You've just got this wonderful visibility all the way around. So the other thing that's great about this car is just how smooth it is as well. I mentioned some of those systems that made the car really handle well, and you definitely find that. You put it into a corner, I mean, okay, it's not a modern BMW, right? But you don't want to go anywhere quickly in this car. You just want to cruise around, just slowly push it into corners, and it just sort of wafts along and takes a nice corner, like we're going to take this one now. So we come into this corner, just gently turn the wheel in, lovely and smooth. There's no problem. You honestly feel like you could just drive this car forever. I mean, that's what it was made to do, was just drive across the interstate and just keep going and keep going. And you really feel so comfortable and so relaxed in it. You just feel like you could just drive along for ages. Even though we're here in Surrey and we're driving through some sort of slightly narrow, windy roads at the moment, again, there's no problem with driving along here. You don't feel like you're particularly in a big car. You don't feel, that it's a problem or anything like that. Just sort of cruising along gently. There's some little tricks that you can do as well. If you do ever find yourself driving a left-hand drive car, it can seem a bit intimidating to drive it, especially if you're on sort of slightly narrow country roads like this. But there are some little tricks that you can do. One of them is when you look out the front of the car, you'll see that there's the left-hand fender just here. And if you keep that sort of lined with the white line on the left-hand side, it's quite a good rule for you being in the right place in the road. What a lovely evening this is, and just how great is it to just drive along in this car, cruise along. One of the things I really love in these old American cars as well is the lighting that you get inside. It's kind of those old incandescent bulbs with a nice sort of yellowy lighting. I know a lot of people upgrade these to LEDs, and I mean, it makes it brighter, but it's so harsh and the light is so harsh. I love the old bulbs in these. I've replaced these bulbs, but I kept the old style bulbs, and that sort of nice yellowish light, it's just so evocative for me of the imagery of it being this sort of time, dusk or evening, and it's just all inviting in this cabin with that lovely lighting. Brakes are really responsive as well. I mentioned earlier that it's got discs. You definitely don't feel there's any problem with the brakes. These brakes are actually boosted as well, so they're power assisted. So you've definitely got a lot of stopping power here, and you feel that you definitely feel confident when you're driving it along with the brakes that you're applying. Well, we're going to end it there, guys. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you want to see more videos about this 1972 Buick Riviera or the new car that I've purchased that I'll be unveiling soon, then please do subscribe. Until next time, this is V8 Adam, signing off.